Good afternoon, all of you. Good morning to Bo in Melbourne, Australia. I will be your host today. My name is Jaime Hernandez Garcia. I'm professor at the Aesthetics Department of the School of Architecture and Design at the Javeriana University in Bogota. I will be, as I said before, your host for this seminar that will be given by Dr. Beza, that I will introduce him in a moment. This lecture will be given in English, but your questions, your comments, you can make them in Spanish in the chat that you have at the right-hand side of your screen. I will be collecting these questions and comments and giving to Bo at the end of his talk. Before starting, I would like to thank Ileana Hernandez, a professor also at the Aesthetics Department, Raúl Niño, the director of the Aesthetics Department, and Natalie Doncel, the department's assistant. All of us are here with you behind the screen in the organization of this talk, and for you for questions and whatever it happens during this session. Before I introduce our guest speaker and his topic, I would like to say that this seminar, the same as others that we have had in the past, are within the new master's program of the Javeriana University called Masters in Artificial Landscapes. As I said, it's a new program that the university is offering that started virtual, informal, and built landscapes. This presentation, this lecture of today given by Bo is within one of these fields or tracks that is regarding built virtual landscapes. If you are interested, we are going to put the link of the master program in the chat for you to explore if you are interested, as I said before. We are accepting applications at the moment, so please feel free to explore what the master is and make the application if you feel like. And if you have questions or whatever you need, you also will find the contact details of people who can address those questions. This is one interesting thing about this master program, possibly for some of you who are attending this lecture at the moment, is that is a semi-present program, a semi-present master. That means that we study one full-time week, one every month. So there's four weeks. And because of the situation that we are all living in everywhere in the world, this week per month will be given remotely, virtually. So actually you can study this master wherever you are. You don't need to move to Bogota to receive the teaching. You can do it in any place, anywhere in Colombia or beyond. So before going any further, I would like to thank Dr. Beza for his time and for sharing these ideas with us, and I would like to introduce him. Dr. Beza, first I have to say that Dr. Beza is a friend of this house. We know each other since, for several years now. And we are very thankful with you, Bob, for again helping us and sharing with us these ideas and reflections and research that you have been going on for the last few years. The name of his talk is Sensory Urbanism and Placemaking, a virtual reality approach to creating place. Dr. Beza is Deputy Associate Dean, Teaching and Learning in the Faculty of Science, Engineering and Built Environment at Deakin University in Geelong, Melbourne, Australia. He's a registered landscape architect with a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture by the University of California, Davis, a Master of Urban Planning at the University of Melbourne, and his PhD was at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. His research aim is to understand the social production of a space and its realization. He has more than 50 years of experience in teaching and research and has widely published works in urban space production. His talk about sensory urbanism is about a project developed and that was an experimental prototype that accounts for the sensory and intangible aspect of place by using immersive virtual reality platform. The sensory urbanism prototype was developed through a placemaking design research into investigating the multisensory and temporal aspect of urban place with professor and design students from Pontificia Universidad Javeriana, Bogota, and Deakin University, Geelong, Australia. The work of this prototype has gone on to become a research area in placemaking using virtual environments at Deakin University's Mediated Intelligent in Design Lab. This lecture will present the approach used to develop the prototype and findings from stage 2 of the SU project, the Sensory Urbanism project, which further tested the prototype in New Zealand and Singapore. Again, for questions and comments, you may use the chat function at the right-hand side of the screens. And Bo, thanks again. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Okay, great. And can everybody see that, or can you see that, Jaime, just to make sure?
Not yet. Now, yes.
Okay, great. So thank you, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've given this talk, spoken before, but just got really nervous doing it over the internet and everything in my lounge room. That's a bit strange, but with the situation that we're all in around the globe, we'll make do. Thank you again for asking me to give this presentation on sensory urbanism and placemaking. I'm going to really just walk you through the work. I'm going to I guess be very casual about this, and so this is very I guess a two-way learning I guess approach. I'll be talking about the research, yes, and then please, if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. I can't answer things of the technical nature. We have two specific dedicated people who are one's a gamer and one's a computer programmer, and they can tell you a lot about the intricacies of the technology. I can talk to you about the larger concepts of placemaking, how we're using this, etc. So I'll just jump right into it. So with the placemaking sensory urbanism, what we're I guess research, the work explores the use of the virtual world as a mechanism to capture and represent the intangible aspects of place. And what I'm talking about intangible, or what I refer to intangible as, is those feelings that you get, that you have when you're in a setting itself, which are far different to I guess discussions of place when we talk about it, when we put it into some text form, etc. So the work is trying to capture being in a setting, actually representing that through an immersive technology. So the first project itself, or how it came to be, by way of background, was, as Jaime mentioned, we've known each other for quite some time. And we have study tours, and I've taken students there to Bogota, and Jaime has brought students from Bogota here to Australia in Geelong. And so we wanted to try something a little bit different. We've been doing placemaking work for quite some time. So we started a project where we wanted to look at placemaking, but do something different and do it in the virtual environment. So his students came out to Oz, and we worked on a project the sensory urbanism, where we developed a prototype. So the first project, you can see Jaime here on there. This is Anastasia, our gamer, and then Ray, our computer programmer, and then the students that helped develop this sensory urbanism prototype. And they're industrial design students, architecture students, landscape architecture students, and an urban planning student as well. So we had a range of different design backgrounds participating in this work. The second project, then once we tested the prototype, we started here in Australia, but then took it to Wellington, New Zealand, for a computer-aided architectural design research in Asia conference to test that prototype we developed. And then we really wanted to confirm, if you want to say, or gather more data in Singapore itself. But we used the study site in Geelong that we did for the original project, and I'll explain a bit more in a moment. And then this is the team there in Wellington, New Zealand, and then in Singapore. And again, here's Anastasia and Ray leading the team of researchers. So with the first study site, I just need to give you a bit of background and context so that you understand some of the things I'll be mentioning about. This is Geelong. It's a lovely beachfront area. So the study site was Eastern Beach. Believe it or not, our campus is just over here on the left-hand side a little bit. So it's hard to sometimes study on lovely sunny days. And so the students, the original research work was trying to understand or develop an understanding of place in the virtual environment from existing conditions of this beachfront area, and then creating an intervention itself. But again, having people experience this through virtual means. The second study site when we did this replication work was in New Zealand, and it was at a museum there in Wellington. And an intervention happened right along this hardscape pier that we had. And then the students, or the conference delegates participated in that setting. Now, before I get into the exact kind of talkings of the research, I just want to quickly mention, just take about 2 minutes to talk about place itself so that we're all on the same page. And I actually want to mention some issues that we have with the concept of place when we're trying to apply it in international contexts. So just briefly, place in the literature, and this is me simplifying it greatly, is a connection between you or people and a setting itself. So when we boil it down, it's some connection. It can be positive or it can be a negative thing as well. But it is a connection with a particular setting between you and that setting itself. We then have a concept of placemaking, which kind of is a process that one employs, and there's many different processes or techniques that you can apply to create place. But it's a process of community engagement, reviewing work, coming up with design ideas, coming up with concepts, etc., that lead to the creation of place. Again, that connection that we have. So place is that established connection. Placemaking is the process that we use to get there. We then have another concept called place attachment, and that tries to describe or explain the intangible community and personal experience deeply felt by a community or person. And attachment to place, though, arises or comes to be from repeated exposure, repeated use of that particular setting. Now, we can go off on tangents and talk about that, but in a nutshell, place attachment comes from the repeated experience, the repeated use of a particular setting. So place is that connection, placemaking is that process, place attachment is repeated use of that setting itself. Now, there are a couple issues with place that you have to understand, and especially with our colleagues and your students in Bogota and Colombia, that place, the concept itself, is an Anglo-Western construct. and it assumes a lot. It assumes quite a bit. And these are some of the things that you have to understand about the concept and to think about it and possibly apply it or not in settings. So one of the assumptions is that a community equally has the right and capacity to participate in like that placemaking process, that engagement process. And we know that communities around the world and even in the West, they don't have equal rights or capacity to participate. Some views, some opinions are heard more than others or listened to more than others. So that's the first assumption. Second, that there is civic stability in a setting. I'm not talking necessarily about war or violent conflict, but there is stability that needs to be in place for this to happen, the placemaking place activity. And importantly, one of the assumptions is that conflict, debate, or differing views can be resolved through collaborative public engagement and peaceful means. Now, conflict, again, you've got to put down war, violent conflicts to the side. Conflict is a natural thing of urbanization, of city building, and these are debates that we have about spaces and environment, which brings us right back to place. But again, you have to remember that it's an assumption that it's stable and that there's the conflict can be, I guess, resolved through peaceful means. A couple things, and I know this is text heavy. I'm not going to read it at all. This is for you to there. In the Spanish language, there's actually no direct translation of place. Place is a very ambiguous, very fluid concept and word, and is purposely designed that way so that it can be applied in many different contexts. The closest thing we have to it is in Espanol, if you want to say, is words like lugar, sitio, ambiente, but those are very, very specific words and used for specific context and description. So place doesn't necessarily translate easily into Espanol. And when we look at the creation of place in South America, there's really 4 distinct periods that lead to, you know, the city urban environments like in Bogota, La Candelaria, Place Boulevard, that we might recognize or identify as place. And those periods are pre-Hispanic, Hispanic, post-Hispanic, and a modernization period itself. And so the point with all of that is that place in the South American context, and pardon me for using that word, comes from a different social production of space, a different collection of works in Latin American cities. And so it's a unique set of circumstances that the urban environment has come to be in places like Bogota. And so I say that so that when you use place or the idea in other situations besides the Anglo-West, you use it with caution, and you use it knowing that there's issues with it when applied in places like Colombia. Okay, back to the research that I'll be talking to you about. Again, so the work is exploring the use of the virtual world as a mechanism to capture and represent the intangible aspects of place. And so here are some words that you might hear me say: affordances, technological affordances, haptic, kinesthetic, computer simulation, and photograph. If you want to do a quick computer screenshot of these, because they may, you may need to go, what is he talking about when he's referring to affordance? So that language is there that you can refer to, because I will mention these a couple times. So again, starting at the research and looking at the applicable nature or not in the real world. Remember, as designers, as students, we're taught to evaluate urban settings in the world from the start of our academic careers. And there's a number of techniques, observations, interviews, that we use to derive a meaning and to evaluate urban setting. When we translate that into members of the public, many of them don't have those same educational experiences in terms of being understanding how to evaluate place and space. Thank you. And so we need to understand that there's a divide right away between the professional, the consultant, the student who understands and is education in evaluating urban spaces, and then many many members of the community that don't. The virtual environment actually at this point in time is a great equalizer because we don't have many methods of evaluating urban spaces in the virtual environment are contested. They're still new, they're still emerging. So it's putting the consultants and members of the public in an equal space, an equal footing, where we both kind of don't know what we're doing, so to speak. We do, but we don't. So the point is we're testing these, so we're all learning about this. So we're on equal footing in the virtual environment. When we experience the world, there's a number of different senses as well. And this is what we're trying to capture again in the virtual environment and think about. And it's those intangible aspects that we're, I guess, trying to recreate in the virtual environment. The first one is, visual. We as designers are very visual. We see the world, etc. We hear it as well. We touch it. There's scents, the smells that we have, part of the urban setting, taste that goes along with it, and the kinesthetic experiences, is like you want to say, that motion, that experiencing it. So you got to think about these things is what we're trying to recreate in that virtual environment. So the process that we went through of recreating a virtual setting in the world, in the virtual world, was pretty detailed. And again, I won't go through all of these, but I'll mention some of the things, and I'm going to actually put dollars to them so that you can understand the costs involved with these. And believe it or not, these aren't that expensive. So to start this off, the gaming if you want to say, platform that we used is called Unity 3D, and it's a gaming engine, which itself is unique. Gaming engines aren't normally used for work like this, and so it's Unity 3D. It's a gaming engine that we use, and it costs about $150 US a month to keep up the licensing. We used a VR-enabled environment and interface, which are translates into Oculus Rift, which is those goggle type things that you see people. And if you look on the screen, Oculus Rift is the device that you hold over your eyes, so that immerses you in the urban environment, in the virtual environment. And Oculus Touch, it's the handheld things, and I'll show you a photograph, an image of those in a moment. And a set of those alone, the headset and the hand devices, are about $640 US. We then had a video projector that we projected on the wall, and that was about $2,000, and then you can get some really expensive ones. Full surround sound that we had, so that we could hear that aural element. That was about $200 for a surround sound system. And of course, you can go up. We had a 360 video camera that we used to capture the space in Geelong and in Wellington, New Zealand. We had 6 Explorer Hero mount GoPros, and those are about $600 each. So times 6, that was quite a little bit expensive. And then, believe it or not, to capture the sound around the sites, we actually just used our smartphones. The technology we have now with our smartphones is pretty easy, and we can use that. And the only difference between the 2 study sites, Geelong and Wellington, was Geelong we used that projector, and in Wellington we used a great big LCD screen that the conference delegates let us use. The other thing that you have to really understand about this work is you have to be so organized. It is unbelievable. And the file system, Explorer, whatever that you use, or sorry, that's a browser. But the file system that you need to use has to be very organized, because you don't have the time to muck around and try to look for things. So your sound, your photograph images, everything has to be labeled precisely so that you could find, and that computer programmer can create links to it itself. So those are really, really important. The computer itself, that's the one thing that I haven't talked about. You really don't need anything sophisticated for the work that I'm going to be showing you and explaining to you. So you don't need to go out and buy a whiz-bang computer. It's pretty much what you have on your laptop or your desktop can do. Maybe a little bit more sophisticated, I'll be honest, but you don't need to go buy something that you can send satellites into space. That handheld device that I was mentioning is this here on the top right hand corner itself. So that's the Oculus Touch, and you hold it in your hands and you use it just like a joystick. So it's pretty intuitive. And importantly, I mentioned the phone, the interface, that haptic interface that I mentioned beforehand, everything revolved around the phone. So when somebody was immersed in virtual environment, basically a phone popped up, and we know how to click around the phone, and it was the interface that we used for people to move around the world, the virtual world itself. And so it really helped create a connection right away in the virtual environment, because we all have phones, we all use them all the time. The details of it, I won't spend too much time on this, but I'll say we created grids of the environment we were working in, and every cell had a series of photographs and sounds that went with it, so that if you were standing in a particular cell, you heard a particular set of sounds, and as you got closer to the road, the sounds got louder. If you got farther away from the road, closer to the beach, the sounds of the vehicles would fall in the background, and then the beach, the waves would get louder, or the seagulls themselves. So we had this surround sound, the sounds linked to these cells as well. From a traditional approach of site evaluation, we do use a lot of photographs, and so we kept that in the virtual environment. People could use the phone to click on or the grid, and then up would come a photograph of the site itself. And that became an important topic in the second study, which I'll mention in a moment. And the day, the night is experienced through differently. So we had, when we built the virtual environment, we had different settings from dawn, morning, lunch, afternoon, and dusk, again, to bring in the reality of that environment. And this is just a snapshot of what it looked like in the virtual environment: dawn, morning, lunch, afternoon, and dusk itself. The events, so remember, I mentioned we were trying to create two aspects of place in the virtual environment. One, the existing conditions, what people experienced a setting the way it is now, and then the students and the conference delegates created events in these settings, again, so that you could have the before, if you want to say, and the after, so that we can measure and we can gauge a sense of how true this virtual tool would be. And this is what the students came up with in the first study tour, with a combination of Colombian and Australian students, was a series of festivals that they could, temporary events in these settings themselves. And again, we used the phone, that haptic interface, to maneuver around them. And these are just examples of the spaces that we created, or the students created, sorry, in this virtual environment. And again, these are static. These are the photographs that I'm mentioning, but when you're immersed in the virtual environment, which is hard to recreate in this presentation, you've got the sounds, you've got motion, you can move and navigate through the site. So again, very important consideration, which I'll mention in a moment. And then this is the lab itself that we use. This is that 360-degree camera, basic screens that we have, and then the projecting setup itself. And then us testing and using the space, or the space we created, the students created in the virtual environment. So a bit of going back and forth to experience this and test it to make sure that what we were doing could potentially work as a prototype. And again, experiencing this at night, so the different times of the day and night to capture that sense of place, that place connection at different times of the day. And again, the team that we had is very successful for the first study. Success meaning we all got along, we all did it. We had 2 weeks to do this activity, which was a huge learning curve for everyone. And at Wellington, we only had 2 days. We dropped it down to 2 days. So it was quite amazing that we could take a product or a research, a potential community engagement tool that started off as a 2-week exercise and reduce it down to 2 days. So there's room for improvement even more. We're hoping to get it down to a bit shorter to that. And I'll explain what I mean by shortening it from 2 weeks to 2 days. Okay, so again, in that virtual environment, we're trying to create the visual, the sound, that touch, etc., to help really support those intangible, if you want to say, qualities of space that complement a setting more so than just looking at a set of drawings or talking about a space. So with the first study, what the results were that we didn't actually have to be very precise in the virtual environment, meaning we didn't have to have the buildings, the textures, the footpath, the sand so detailed and so precise that it was that it conveyed a sense of being 100% real. That wasn't the case. The people that tested it, they were very accommodating. So if it simulated sand, if it kind of looked like it, that was fine. If we got up close to trees or a built feature and it kind of had the simulation of tree bark or the texture of paving or grass, that was fine. It was okay. Our minds, we were able to interpret that as a surface of some sort, and so we didn't have to be precise, which is great. That means you can reduce a lot of time in recreating those because it's just not needed. And the lack of detail, is actually a good thing. What we tend to do what we were finding in the computer world, and I'm sure some of you know this when we present drawings to community members or to clients, those hard lines are translated as to they're being fixed. And so that lack of detail actually allowed the respondents to understand that it's still a concept as opposed to something that's very formal being potentially interpreted as a finished product. And when we look at the sound in the first study, we found that sound was actually important, and I'll mention that in the second one. And we found that actually by mistake, where we had sound and it was just white noise. But as soon as we thought, oh, let's get rid of that. But as soon as we did, the sound itself disconnected us from the world. And so although the sound was a bit odd, it helped us to connect back to the setting. So that was important that we found in the second study, but it's not so important actually when we did the second study, and I'll explain in a moment. That background ambience or the immediate foreground is important for that visual perception. We have to have that depth in a setting in order for there to be that sense of reality. We also have to have that sound connection, whereas you're approaching, as I mentioned, a road, the cars get the sound of the vehicles going past gets louder, but as we get away from it, it diminishes. Also sounds that you hear in normal day-to-day activity, like the study space that we were in, the air conditioning kept turning on and then turning off. And for respondents, that potentially can be disruptive, but they ignored that after a while because they were so immersed in their environment. It was a very, they were able to look beyond that. And that's a good thing to understand when you're doing this potentially with community members, is that they can turn off from those external kind of stimuli that may interrupt their engagement or their evaluation of a particular setting. And that's because, again, the people relate immediately to the space they're immersed in. And the virtual environment allows us to experience and to do things in the space that we normally aren't able to if we're just looking at a set of drawings. So from that point of view, the prototype, the sensory urbanism tool for evaluating space was plausible. And I can't tell you that, yeah, it worked, go out and get one, because it doesn't work that way. We're saying that what we were designing, what we were developing, what we were putting together to evaluate space, to try to measure and recreate those intangible aspects of place, it's plausible. Yeah, it's working. It seems like we can do it. Okay, so just have to keep that in the back of your mind. With the second study, we were a lot more focused. So this is recreating the work in Wellington, New Zealand, where there was an intervention along that museum hardscape foreshore area. And then in Singapore, the respondents looked at what the students did in Geelong themselves. Again, but this time we had questionnaires, we had tools to help measure the experience. So stage one was a prototype development, plausibility, and now we're thinking the opportunity, that affordance that this offers in evaluating space. And in a nutshell, when we're talking about use, age, gender, previous virtual reality experience didn't matter. Within about 2 minutes of explaining what the people were going to experience through a demonstration, people became competent. So that was really good. You have to understand that in the virtual environment, when you put that headset in that you see one of the research participants in, and you're navigating the world in virtual reality, means there's a tendency for some people to get sick. It's like riding a roller coaster or something like that, a ride. And so they can get sick. But we didn't have any ill effects from respondents, but you got to be cautious with that. And generally people explored the virtual world for about 5 to 15 minutes, and then they got bored of it. The experience itself, the immersive environment, again, as I mentioned, brought to life the setting. The respondents that participated in the second phase and third phase of the study had positive immersive experiences with the approach, meaning they could navigate, and they reported that they did get a sense of being there at that place. They could understand the design, if I can use that language, to simulate what it is that we were trying to create. And so, yeah, again, their opinion, the proposed multisensory placemaking in virtual reality brings new opportunities to this design table, meaning you as designers can potentially use this tool to help in your community engagement activities to evaluate the space and provide options, provide you with options in your finalizations of the design. And so when we looked at the ratings of the questionnaire, the surveys that we had the placemaking experience was rated as very effective. The tool was easy to use and intuitive, which is important because you can't have people not understanding. They've got to really be able to jump onto this effectively. Respondents said that the most important aspect of the tool was the 3D dimension. It was the model. It was whatever it was that you were building was important. And again, it didn't have to be total 100% accurate, but the model itself was very important. Photographs, as I mentioned before, actually were least important. When we asked them, and I'll show you another image in a moment, the importance of these things, everybody that responded was, I've said, look, photographs, it just doesn't matter. You don't need them in a virtual setting because we're actually able to navigate and to walk around these settings. So that's a dynamic element of the virtual world or the evaluation tool, where the photograph is a static. You just kind of look at it and you have to project yourself or imagine yourself in that setting. And you don't need those photographs because you're already immersed in that. Sound also was not such a big deal. When we did the second bits of the study, the respondent said, look, it's not that big of a deal. So I was a bit crushed by that one, but anyway, it's okay. That's all part of the research. So sound wasn't as important as we originally thought. But importantly, I do have to say, this is just preliminary type stuff. And we have to do more studies in this to really test the tool, the applicability of not its use in design proposals or in community engagement activity. And again, so these are things that councils, people that you work with, the tools at hand to curate this are readily available. And those costs that I gave you of, you know, 150 for the gaming engine per month. The tools of the headgear that the gentleman's wearing in the screen you're seeing, the Oculus Touch handheld device, you know, those are combined $640. Of course, you get more expensive one, but US. So again, these things, these tools aren't out of reach. They can be used in these settings. Now what? When we look at the findings and we're looking at it, so we're trying to look at, I guess, if you want to say the bare essentials of the tool, what might be used, what might not be needed, so that we can get those 2 days that I was talking about. We went from 2 weeks to 2 days, and we're trying to get it down to even a shorter period, because with community engagement activities, with design charrettes, we don't have the luxury of long periods of time. We got to shorten it down to even more. So when you're thinking about process and getting this down to shorter, but still keeping that placemaking and those intangible elements of place able to be recreated, and what's important, what's not. So we're looking at it, and it's this upper end here of those videos, the 3D, the soundscape, which are really important, just off the top of the from the survey data. We then also, you know, well, what's optional, what's important, and again, those photographs, the data says no, you don't need those, but the respondents also, which we were really surprised by, wanted aspects of weather in there as well. You know, the rain, the wind, etc., the sun. So we're trying to come to grips with that. Other people are very important. So you know, the world is full of people. Spaces are full of people. So if you notice, we only had one person experience that site at the same time. What if we can have 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, experiencing that same site at the same time? So these are some of the things we're trying to build into it. And smell was another thing that respondents requested as potentially being important. We're trying to figure out how to do that, because there used to be a concept back in the 70s or 80s of smell-o-vision. Some of you more established senior colleagues may remember things about that, with people trying to create that. Or if you were at a movie theater and you were walking through a space where there were flowers, you know, a scent of flowers would come in. Or if you were at a restaurant, the food would come in. So it's just, it's a difficult one. So anyway, we've got to see about these things. What we're also looking at, and this is with Jaime, Professor Hernandez, that was mentioning our relationship, our studies and our work together. We're talking about having another study tour, but this one, if you want to say, a virtual education experience, because we're not able to go to Colombia, and you're not able to come to Australia. So we're thinking about doing something in the virtual environment that, you know, plays with this tool and other things a bit more. So it's something to be aware of from the Australians. If I can't see who's participating or not. Many of my students were participating in this or creating this, so keep an eye out, and the Colombian students as well. This is something that might interest you. If you do want to read more about the work itself, here is the reading from the conference. The Stage 2 project works. We're writing that up right now, so that's one of my tasks after this as well, is to write up those findings that I was just mentioning. So thank you all very much. I appreciate you listening, and I can't tell if you fell asleep. I hope you were all awake, so thank you. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thanks very much, Bo, for this very interesting lecture. Many interesting topics and several questions.
Oh, okay.
So I have collected 7 questions, by the way. I was trying to group them, but I was unsuccessful. So I'm going to make one by one. But just one question to you, or something to tell you, is that looking at the questions, each question could be, you could develop a full 2 hours lecture. But we need, yeah, please, the quick, your reaction or whatever you want to say, to have the chance to make the 7 questions to you. Again, thanks very much, and thanks very much to the audience for the attendance and people who made the questions. And here it is, the first one. It says, thanks for the topic. For me, it's essential in this post-pandemic era. My question is, because of the pandemic, of the quarantine and the public health issues, what are the main advantages for use digital virtual worlds, massive, like the metaverses, instead the physical world, like a virtual event, virtual classes, or virtual fair, for example? Thanks a lot.
Yep. So I guess in this pandemic situation, the opportunity to engage with the community in a wide range of virtual experiences, quite high. You can imagine doing this on a work day or on a weekend, and you basically have the community engage much like we were doing now, or projecting these tools through the computer. Those goggles that I showed you, they actually you can get them in cardboard format, and you can actually put your phone inside of it, and then that becomes the virtual world for you. And so again, there's the possibilities of doing this and getting a wide ranging audience. It can be that learning tool. It can be provide us with a range of opportunities. The flip side of that, though, is we're not virtual people. All the urban spaces that we experience and have in the world, they're meant to go out and be touched and to see. And like, I love walking around Plaza Bolivar or La Candelaria there, because I'm in the space. I want to see it. So there's currently this VR tool provides us with opportunities to, I guess, engage and to access a wider group. But we got to remember, we want to still bring it back to some balance of engagement with the real world itself. So it's both good and bad, these tools, but we have the potential to access a wide-ranging group of people with these. I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bob. Second, this is more like a comment, but anyway, I'm gonna read it, and if you have any reaction to that, that's fine. It says, "Hi, Bo, great work in such a small amount of time. I know it's very tricky, but curious to hear if the study considered the wind in your hair, the smell of the ocean, the sun, heat on your face. Great to hear about the haptic considerations."
Yep. Yeah, that's a really good question. The smell, the scent that I was mentioning, that's a tough one, because there's actually in Geelong, when the students were doing this, there was, I think, a hot dog stand, or somebody was selling popcorn. It was food, and you could get the smell of that. I know they were also selling ice creams there, and everybody had ice cream, if Jaime remembers that. The point is that these things are there, and I don't think we'll be able to recreate every single thing in the virtual world. The scent is a very difficult one. The interesting thing with wind that you mentioned is that sound dimension that I was talking about in the first study. It was so windy on the days we were out there trying to do the studies that no matter what we did recording wise with our phones, you got the coming past. And even though we thought it was a hindrance, when we were actually in the virtual setting testing it, it was that wind that was kind of an element that brought us or connected us to that space. So I understand those elements are important, and I hear what you're saying. It's going to be difficult for us to try to recreate all of those ones, smell being one of them.
Thank you, Bo. This is the third one that to some extent I would say it is very much linked to the previous one. And it's about place. And with this elaboration that you did at the beginning of how place is actually a difficult concept, because it has different meanings and is very much encapsulated in language and culture. But maybe we can all agree that place has a strong connotation with land, with the physical space. So that makes or brings challenges to the issue of recreating in the virtual world. To some extent, the question is, do you believe that it can be possible, or to some extent, or it will be until some extent, but the other part, it would be impossible ever.
Yep.
Any reaction to that?
Yeah, I agree. Every culture, every people have a concept of place. Now, I'm not trying to contradict myself. I'm using the word place because I think we're all familiar with that. So they have a concept of some connection with an understanding. It's just place itself, though. That particular word, that concept comes from the West. And as I mentioned, those assumptions that are embedded in that word place are what I really guard against using in other settings besides the West. When we are trying to then put that into the virtual reality setting, yeah, again, we might not necessarily use place, we might use something else depending on the site that we're investigating. Let's say, for example, the virtual environment, we're trying to look at a place in, again, Bogota, Caracali, Potosi, Bologna, any of these informal settlements. There's a whole different collection of works, social production and spaces that come to be. So we might use the virtual environment as a tool to recreate that, but the concept that we use to help explain the setting itself might be something like urban resilience. And this is something like that Jaime and I are working on, and we're using on a paper at the moment. Or it might be another concept that fundamentally is different, as in like sustainability, citizenship. So think about potentially separating the tool that I was mentioning from the concept, because that connection of a setting between people, yep, that's there. The tool might be able to help explore that. The concept, place, sustainability, citizenship, urban resilience, might be then used as a overlaying or supporting mechanism to help explain what people are experiencing or having, or a way to talk about that connection with the setting. So think of them kind of as separate but together.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. For the next question, I'm going to join two questions. One that has been posted initially, and another one that just arrived. And it's a little bit the other way around. It's not how technology can capture and represent a space or place or the world, but the other way around, how technology can enhance the experience of the space. Particularly, the two linked questions are, how can public space could be enhanced with technology devices, linked to what you commented about place attachment? And the second part of the question, or the linked associated question, is how the virtual and augmented technologies could impact the actual education. So it's about technology, how it could enhance the experience of the physical space, of the public space in cities, and how could the technologies also, particularly the augmented technologies, it says here, can enhance or improve education.
Yep. Good questions. The first one, technology enhancing spaces. I sit there and I go, I don't know. You know, I honestly wonder when I go to urban spaces, and again, I'll bring it back to Bogota. You know, if I'm in Plaza Bolivar, and I kind of want to be disconnected from the world. I've been to that space probably 7 or 8 different times over the years. I started going to Colombia in 2013. So yeah, I sit there wondering how, you know, might these technologies, and we've got to look beyond the use of them to enhance commercial experiences or treating the community member as client, because there's a big square here in Melbourne called Federation Square, and it's a public, privately owned or managed space. And the technology, if you want to say that they have, are great big screens that you can have events there. And when there aren't events, like for the Australian Open tennis that's coming up, I say that because it was on the news today, that screen is used then to have advertisements. And I'm sitting there going, well, how is that actually enhancing my experience? I don't want to go buy a pizza from somewhere else, or, you know, it's like, I don't understand, or shoes. And then when we flip it on its side around to the other question, you know, how might augmented realities help education experiences? Well, or education, it's possible to get to a wide audience and to convey a message of some sort. And that message can be positive or negative, depending on who's sending it. I mean, you know, we've got, please don't yell at me. You can tell by my accent, I'm not originally from Australia. The president of the United States is using messaging and technology to really kind of subvert a process, in my opinion. And it's you know, can be used in very negative means or ways itself. And so you've got to really think about the use and appropriateness of these. They can be used for good, for negative means. And it's something that we always have to watch. There's potential, there's opportunities for each, but think about, do we need these technologies in public settings? To what extent do we need them for education?
Thank you. Thanks very much, Bo. This next question is about placemaking. Placemaking, very much in the fundamentals of placemaking, as you explained, is a stakeholder interaction, participation. Technology could, to some extent, enhance or could help to bring this involvement of different stakeholders, but at the same time it could be difficult. So how do you see, the question is more or less like this, how do you see placemaking by virtual terms? Is it possible? It can be better, it can be worse, is something that we just need to do because of the situation? Or how do you see this placemaking for this use?
Yep, no worries. So I still think we have a ways to go with using this widely. Hence, I was mentioning we still got a few more, well, we still have a number of more tests and research explorations that we have to do. Again, we have to think more in terms of the opportunity. I do think it has the opportunity, the potential to be used in public forums to help create better urban spaces. But again, there's assumptions. One, people have this technology, we can explain it, they can use it. And we also have the assumption that everybody can equally participate in this. And we know that's just not the case. So there's opportunity, there's potential there, but we have to be really guarded, or we're aware of these assumptions and we have to address them when we're trying to roll this out to a wider audience for use, in design.
Excellent, thank you, Bo. I don't want to be abusive of your time and of the time of the people who are listening to us. So this is just the last two questions, I promise.
Yep.
The first one of those is, you have referred in your lecture and in your presentation very much to the issue of capture and representing. You have also commented some other possibilities, but the question is more about what these devices, what these technologies can actually help one to design, that to some extent you have discussed a little bit about it, but more about in terms of thinking, of imagining some possible words for possible different alternatives, not just for representing and capturing and looking at, but also to design and even more to think about new possibilities particularly in urban settings.
Yeah, that's really good. Again, the possibilities capturing alternatives is the potential for that is great, because as I mentioned, those events that the students created, we had events that the respondents, the research participants, could click to the 3 different events at 5 different times of the day. That's 15 different experiences. Oh, I got my math right. That somebody can experience instantly within that 5 to 15 minute time frame that I was mentioning. People explore the setting, could experience. You could also think about that the designers could change, amend things quite rapidly, because much of this stuff isn't that sophisticated. It's like SketchUp type of stuff, as I was mentioning with the textures, that detail that's needed. So it's very rudimentary, if you want to say that's acceptable. So you can manipulate change and then have people experiencing those settings again at those different times of the day, etc. So the opportunities there are quite good for rapid, I guess, exploration of alternative design ideas. You're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, I was muted. Thank you. And the last question is very much about, like a future reflection, if I may say so. It seems to be that many of what we are doing now, working from home, starting from home, it's a little interaction to some extent. Some of these things, it seems to be that that in the post-pandemic era, they are going to remain to some extent. And technologies and devices and this way of using the technologies and the city, they are going to remain to some extent. So it seems to be that our post-pandemic cities will be like a mixed experience between the technology and the actually physical experience. Do you have any thoughts, any ideas, anything that it comes to your mind of this new world that it seems to be in 1 or 2 years' time will come to all of us in different senses?
Yeah, good question. I'm actually wondering about that, and I'm going to, I guess, use you, Jaime, in our conversations as a way to help answer that. Is when we're traveling the world, going to these places, if one is fortunate to do that. That's why I became an academic, so I could, go travel these worlds, research, and so on. Being in a setting, to me, is remarkable. Again, I keep referring to Plaza Boulevard. It's something that we all know there in Bogota, and it's fantastic. Experiencing the Transmilenio, walking around any of the sites there in the city are great, and I love it because I'm there. It's totally different. It's a culture. Everybody's speaking Espanol. The foods, the drink is fantastic. The scents, whatever. It's a different life to what I normally have. That's so hard to recreate in the virtual world. I know, with the browsers that we have now, things like Google Earth or many of those others, we can go and experience these settings. We can virtually walk around them and so on. So it's the potential's there, but I'm still a very old school. I like to be there. So at the moment, yep, we're going to have some balance. We're going to have to create ways or tools or strategies to recreate those settings. In particular, our case, Jaime, between our students, your Colombian students, trying to get an understanding of what it's like to be here in Australia and Geelong, and our Australian students trying to understand what it's like experiencing the streets of Bogota, or the Transmillennial, or something. So I don't think we're there yet. I'm sure there are people working on it. I don't quite have the answers for it, but we're going to have to nut these out and work these through, because unfortunately we're going to be in this situation for a little bit longer, year, two, whatever. But being there is part of the fun of experiencing these settings, and the virtual world can only give you so much.
Completely agree with you. Well, thanks very much, Bo. It was thanks very much for your time, for sharing these ideas and reflection with us. And well, I'm gonna make to the closing now, starting by thanking you for this fantastic lecture that you have given us. And for the closing, I would like to well, I was planning to announce it, but you announced it earlier than me. Is that we are thinking with Bo a virtual study tour for students of architecture and industrial design at Javeriana, and students of Deakin University at Geelong, Melbourne, Australia. And we are thinking of developing these ideas further, very much of what Bo has already commented today. Also, the idea is to engage and invite the students of the new master program in artificial landscapes for this virtual study tour or study course, better to say that way, that will be given in July next year. But also some of the topics that Bo has discussed and shared with us are within the field of study of the Masters in Artificial Landscapes. That, as I was said at the beginning, for those who were not here in these initial minutes, this seminar and some others that we have given both in English and in Spanish are within the new master program that the university is offering, that studies what we call virtual landscapes, informal landscapes, and built landscapes. Applications we are receiving applications at the moment. You can see in the chat the link for having more information about this master program if you are interested. And as I said before, many of these topics will be studied further in these masters that we are offering to you. For the closing, I would like to thank all of you who were attending this presentation. Thanks for your attendance, for your comments, and for your questions. I would like to thank also Iliana Hernandez, Raúl Niño, and Nathalie Doncel, all members of the Aesthetics Department of the School of Architecture and Design at the Javeriana University, for producing and being pending a very aspect of this seminar. And well, my special thanks to my colleague and friend, Dr. Beza. As he said, we have been going on together in different projects for more than 5 years now. I think more around 10, around 8 years, I think. And I'm happy to develop some other joint collaborations as the virtual study course, as the master program. And thanks so much, Bob, for your time and for your effort here, and again for sharing with us these reflections, studies, and research that you have done in your academic career. So that's all from me. Thanks to all of you, and have a good, for Colombian people, have a good evening and night. And for you, Bo, have a good day that you are about
Just starting.
starting the day. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.